I recently spent an afternoon with a man who is, by all public accounts, a paragon of conscious leadership. He is the type of person who quotes Marcus Aurelius in every meeting and spends his weekends at expensive retreats designed to cultivate radical empathy. As we sat in a crowded bistro, he was mid-sentence, speaking with a serene, practiced warmth about the spiritual necessity of seeing the inherent dignity in every person we encounter. Then, a delivery driver, shouldering a heavy thermal bag and looking visibly exhausted, accidentally brushed against his chair while navigating the narrow aisle. The shift was instantaneous. That serene warmth didn't just fade, it evaporated. He snapped a remark about basic competence and situational awareness that was so sharp it felt like a physical strike. The driver mumbled a panicked apology and hurried away, but my companion didn't even pause to reflect. He simply adjusted his cufflinks, took a sip of his sparkling water, and went right back to explaining how kindness is the only true currency of the future. It was a jarring display of cognitive dissonance. He clearly didn't see the contradiction. In his own mind, he was still the hero of his narrative, the wise philosopher of the bistro. But to everyone else in that room, the radical empathy was revealed as nothing more than a costume. Watching him, I realized how easily we mistake our intentions for our identity. We treat our high-minded beliefs like a polished trophy on a shelf, forgetting that character isn't a declaration, it's a demonstration. It is what's left over when the room is crowded, your energy is low, and your patience is paper-thin. We like to think we are defined by the stories we tell about ourselves, but the hard truth is that we are only what we do repeatedly, especially when there is no audience left to applaud.
Wow. I mean, that story, it just paints such a visceral picture.
It was uncomfortable to watch.
I bet. And it's uncomfortable because it feels so recognizable, you know?
Yeah.
It perfectly frames this central tension that we're going to be exploring in this deep dive.
Exactly.
It's that huge gap between character as a declaration, all the things we post, the values we say we have, this identity we curate, and then character as a demonstration.
Which is the actual, tangible, physical stuff, what you do.
What's left over when the audience is gone.
Yeah. And that moment, that bistro moment, it really stuck with me because it feels symptomatic of a much larger cultural thing that's going on.
It does.
We are living in an era that is just obsessed with the declaration. We optimize our LinkedIn profiles to say the right things. Companies spend, millions on these beautiful mission statements. We're constantly broadcasting our why.
It's all about the story.
It's all story. It's as if saying the right thing has become the same as doing the right thing. But today, we're going to pivot hard. We're going to leave that bistro entirely and look at a part of the world, specifically the industrial economies of East Asia, where that entire dynamic is, well, it's often completely inverted.
Right. We're diving into what some economists call the production-centered paradigm. And we're going to look at how Confucian ethics have quietly, but I think radically, reshaped what integrity even means in places like Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and of course, China.
And we've got a whole stack of research here. We're looking at developmental economics, corporate governance, leadership psychology, and it all paints a really different picture of what character means when you take the talking out of it.
Yeah, the mission for this deep dive really is to understand how entire nations pulled themselves up, some from absolute ruin, not by, talking about their values, but by embedding those values into actual things.
Into infrastructure.
Into manufacturing precision, into these hardcore survival strategies. We're going to see how integrity isn't an internal feeling you have. It's an external object.
An external object. I like that. And to kick this all off, I want to share a story that is just the polar opposite of the bistro philosopher.
Okay, let's get into it.
So I came across this fascinating piece of documentation, sort of industrial ethnography, about a senior master technician. We'll call him Mr. Watanabe. He works, or at least he did, in a precision instrument factory. It's in a quiet, nondescript industrial district in Japan. And this is a man who has spent 40 years, 40 in the exact same facility.
Wow.
The description of his daily routine, it's almost monastic. He barely speaks. Maybe a few sentences a day to his team.
Which, in a modern Western corporate setting, that would probably get him flagged by HR for, poor communication skills or not being a team player?
Oh, absolutely. Western management would see that silence and they'd read it as a lack of leadership, a lack of soft skills, or maybe he's just, grumpy.
Right. Not a culture fit.
Not a culture fit, exactly. But in his world, his character is entirely contained within the work itself, specifically. It's contained within the 0.001 millimeter tolerance of the optical lenses he polishes by hand.
That is an insane level of precision.
It's almost unimaginable. And there was this one moment described in the report where a younger apprentice, maybe someone influenced by more modern Western ideas about management, he asks Watanabe why he doesn't write a manual.
He wants the theory.
The why.
He wants the philosophy of the work. And Watanabe, he doesn't answer with words. He just points to a tray of finished optical components, these perfectly polished lenses, and says, the quality is the speech.
The quality is the speech.
Yeah.
That's incredibly potent.
It just stopped me in my tracks. It's like, It's the perfect realization of that whole Confucian superior man ethos we were just talking about, where all the noisy declarations of your values are. They're just pointless.
They're superfluous. The silence is actually filled by something else. Yes, it's filled by the relentless day in, day out pursuit of perfection. And learning about him, I felt this deep respect for what I'm starting to think of as industrial integrity.
Industrial integrity, I like that.
We put so much emphasis on a person's story, right? Their journey, their struggle, how they express themselves. But for men like Watanabe, the story is the steel. The story is the glass. It just makes me wonder if our modern obsession with personal branding has made us lose sight of the quiet dignity in just being useful.
In being useful to the world's actual physical infrastructure.
Exactly.
And that phrase you used, industrial integrity, that is the perfect anchor for this whole segment. Because what's so fascinating about the Watanabe example is that this isn't just about one guy's personality quirk. He's not just an introvert.
No.
He is the living embodiment of a very specific philosophical ideal that we see all through the source material on Confucianism and management.
So you're saying this isn't a personal preference? This is a cultural framework he's operating in.
Precisely. If we look at the Confucian concept of the Gen Z, it's often translated as the superior man, or maybe better, the exemplary person. There's the famous line in the Analects.
Right.
The superior man is modest in his speech, but exceeds in his actions.
Watanabe is living that text.
He is living that text. In that worldview, talking about your integrity almost, it deflates it. It diminishes the reality of it. The integrity has to be externalized. It has to be put into the object you create.
So if you have to tell me you're a good person,
there's a deep suspicion that maybe you aren't. It's the absolute opposite of our fake it till you make it culture.
It's make it and then don't talk about it.
Exactly. And this connects to another core Confucian idea called Zheng Ming.
The rectification of names.
Yes. And this is a concept that often, I think, confuses Westerners. The idea is that social harmony comes from everyone fulfilling their specific role and doing it responsibly. A ruler acts as a ruler should act, a father as a father, and in this case, a technician as a technician.
So staying in your lane isn't an insult. It's what, a moral duty?
It's the absolute foundation of social order. Mr. Watanabe isn't trying to be a thought leader or, an influencer on LinkedIn.
God, no.
He isn't trying to build a personal brand. He is fulfilling his role through absolute, uncompromising precision. If he were to step outside that role to pontificate about his philosophy, he would actually be violating Zheng Ming. He'd be creating disorder.
It feels like a willing submission to the role, but for the sake of the greater good.
It is. And the virtues we hear about, like Ren, which is usually translated as benevolence or humaneness, and Li, which is propriety or ritual, they take on a very physical meaning here.
How so?
Well, we usually think of Li, as social etiquette, bowing correctly, pouring tea the right way. But in an industrial context like this factory, Li is the discipline of doing your work correctly so that the whole system functions.
The ritual of the work.
The ritual of the work. I mean, think about it. If Watanabe is off by that 0.001 millimeter, the camera lens he's making fails. If the lens fails, maybe the satellite it's in fails.
Yeah.
If the satellite fails, the communication system for a whole country could fail. His silence and his precision. That is his form of Ren. That's his benevolence.
He's showing benevolence to the end user, to someone he's never going to meet.
A person he will never, ever meet.
That is just a wild way to think about manufacturing. It totally transforms it from just a job into a moral act. It gives this incredible weight to what seems mundane.
It does.
But okay, let's zoom out a bit. We're talking about one guy in one factory polishing a piece of glass. How does this this individual silence, this intense precision connect to the massive, undeniable economic growth we've seen in East Asia over the last 50 years. Because these countries didn't just make a few good lenses, they completely reorganized the global economy.
Okay, this is the critical bridge, right? We have to connect this philosophy to hard economics. And this is where we need to bring in the work of the economist Ha-Joon Chang.
Right.
He argues very forcefully that the modern Western world has kind of lost the plot in economics. We've shifted to what he calls a neoclassical view, which is, at its heart, exchange-centered.
Exchange-centered. You mean it's all about the market, the deal?
It's all about the trade. Buying low, selling high, getting the prices right, as they say. It treats the entire economy like a giant bazaar or, a stock exchange.
Okay.
In this view, economic development is just about optimizing those trades. But Chang argues for a completely different model, a production-centered paradigm. He says the East Asian miracle, the explosive rise of Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and then China. It didn't happen because they were geniuses at trading. It happened because they focused almost obsessively on transforming their productive capabilities.
Productive capabilities. That sounds a little academic. What does that actually mean on the ground in the factory?
It's the difference between buying a suit and working out.
Okay, I like that.
You can buy a suit instantly. That's an exchange. But building muscle, that takes time, it takes pain, it takes repetition. Productive capability is the muscle. It's not just having the machines. Anyone with enough money can buy a machine. It's the organizational knowledge. It's the engineering intuition. It's the collective know-how that's embedded in people like Mr. Watanabe.
So you can't just import development in a shipping container. You have to grow it slowly.
You have to grow it. You cannot buy 40 years of intuition about how glass reacts to heat and pressure. You have to live through those 40 years of trial and error. Chang's whole point is that true economic development is about upgrading these physical and mental capabilities. And the silence of Watanabe, that's the sound of that capability being built.
It's an internal accumulation of power, not an external broadcast of it.
Exactly.
That makes so much sense. So while the West, maybe in the last few decades, has focused more on the software of the economy, marketing, branding, financial engineering.
All the declarative stuff.
All the declarative stuff. These economies focused on the hardware, on making things that actually physically work.
Yes. And Chang is really clear on this. This was a deliberate and often very painful national choice. These nations often protected their new industries with tariffs and subsidies, not to isolate themselves forever, but to give their infant industries time to learn.
Time to get strong enough to compete.
They needed time to fail, to struggle, and to build that deep, silent competence before they could face the brutal competition of the global market. It's a survival strategy. And it's rooted in this fundamental idea that if you can't make things, you aren't truly independent.
You're just a customer.
You're just a customer.
And that idea of survival, of getting things done because the alternative is just unacceptable. That leads me right to the next story. We're going to leave the clean, quiet, temperature-controlled factory and go somewhere much, much messier.
Okay.
Because sometimes integrity isn't about microscopic precision. It's about holding the line against chaos.
Take us there.
I was reading through these reports on the rapid infrastructure and reconstruction efforts in the Pearl River Delta. This is an area, as you know, that faces massive seasonal flooding. The stakes are literally life and death every year.
Right.
And I came across the story of a project manager named Lynn. Now, in the West, we spend so much time debating what we could call procedural idealism.
The idea that the process matters as much as the result.
Exactly. We ask, did you follow the proper channels? Did you file the forms? But for this manager, for Lynn, integrity was completely redefined as result-oriented pragmatism.
Total shift in priority.
The massive one. The report detailed this crisis moment. Water levels were rising fast. And Lynn, he bypassed 3 distinct layers of bureaucratic meetings. He skipped a bunch of non-essential safety briefings.
Which would give a Western compliance officer a heart attack.
A complete meltdown. To an auditor, this looks like a clear violation. It looks reckless. It looks like he's opening them up to lawsuits.
Right.
But to him, his personal morality, his integrity, it wasn't about following the handbook to the letter. His social responsibility was to keep the lights on and the water out for 10 million people. And he did what was necessary to reinforce a critical levee before the tide turned.
The context defines the moral act.
It's all context. Trying to imagine the pressure he was under, It's just clear that in these high-stakes survival mode environments, character becomes synonymous with collective resilience.
The ability to endure.
Yes. And reading this, I'll admit, I felt a little conflicted. Our liberal sensibilities, they recoil at cutting corners or ignoring procedure. We immediately think of corruption or negligence.
Sure.
But then I looked at the photos of the dry homes, the functioning hospitals behind that levee, and I realized that for a civilization in a state of constant survival and ascent, maybe the most moral act is the one that actually works. Lynn's character wasn't in his words, and it sure as hell wasn't in the paperwork. It was in the dry ground beneath his neighbor's flute.
That phrase, the character was in the dry ground, that really hits home. It forces us to confront this major philosophical divide between, broadly speaking, the East and the West.
Yeah.
In the West, particularly in the US and Europe, we are so heavily invested in procedural rights and procedural justice.
Meaning we cared deeply if the rules were followed. Was the trial fair? Were the permits filed in triplicate?
Exactly. We have this deep-seated belief that if the process is fair, then the outcome is legitimate, even if the outcome is, well, bad.
Right.
But Lynn is operating under a totally different framework. It's one that prioritizes what legal scholars call substantive rights.
Substantive rights. What's the difference?
Substantive rights are about the actual enjoyment of basic human needs. The right to life, the right to safety, the right to have electricity and a roof that doesn't leak.
The outcome.
The outcome. In Lynn's mind, and in the mind of the system he works in, if that levee breaks because he was busy filling out a safety compliance form, he has committed a profound moral failure. He might have been procedurally correct, but he was substantively dead.
And that is the developmental state mindset in a nutshell, isn't it?
It is. The developmental state is a concept. It's famously analyzed by Chalmers Johnson when he was looking at Japan's MITI, their Ministry of International Trade and Industry, and later it was applied to the Asian tigers like South Korea and Taiwan. And it describes what he called a hard state.
Okay, now a hard state sounds ominous, like a dictatorship.
And it can be, but in this specific economic context, it refers to capacity. It's about a state that has the power and the autonomy to resist powerful interest groups, even its own internal slow-moving bureaucracy, in order to achieve long-term national goals.
So unlike in many Western democracies where the government can be paralyzed by lobbying, by lawsuits, by trying to please every single constituency at once.
Precisely. A hard state says, we are going to build this semiconductor industry, or we are going to save this city from the flood, and we are not going to let short-term complaints or procedural hurdles stop us from achieving that existential goal.
So it's not just about oppression, it's about focus. It's about having the state capacity to actually execute a vision.
Correct. And this creates a different kind of legitimacy. It's what scholars call performance legitimacy.
Okay.
In a liberal democracy, a leader's legitimacy comes from the ballot box. I was elected, therefore I'm legitimate. Simple. In a developmental state, legitimacy often comes directly from results. I delivered 8% GDP growth, I kept the floodwaters back, I ensured the power grid works, therefore I am legitimate.
It's a really high-stakes game. You actually have to deliver. You can't just give a good speech and hope for the best.
You absolutely have to deliver. If you fail to deliver, you lose the mandate of heaven, to use the classical Chinese term.
Right.
And this connects so deeply to Neo-Confucian ethics. Our sources on this talk about how Neo-Confucianism really emphasizes responsibility to the larger entity, the community, the nation, over the rights of the individual.
So if Lynn had paused to worry about his own individual liability, like, am I going to get sued if this goes wrong?
He would have been prioritizing his own safety over the community's survival. In that ethical framework, that's a selfish act. By bypassing the bureaucracy, he was acting as a responsible agent for the collective good.
It's a collective survival strategy baked into the culture.
Absolutely. We have to remember the history here. I mean, many of these East Asian miracle economies, they were playing catch-up. They were late industrializers. They were coming out of decades, sometimes centuries, of colonization, war, and deep poverty.
Right.
When you are that far behind, and when you feel the fragility of your entire civilization, cutting corners on procedure to ensure physical survival isn't viewed as corruption. It's viewed as a moral imperative.
That is such a crucial distinction. We often look at developing nations and we see them skip a permit or fast-track a project and we scream corruption.
We do.
But from their perspective, our strict multi-year procedural review process is a luxury they just can't afford yet. The bridge needs to be built now or people starve next winter.
Right. So it challenges our definitions, doesn't it? We have the silent, clean room perfectionism of Mr. Watanabe, and now we have the muddy, rule-breaking pragmatism of project manager Lynn.
One is about absolute adherence to tolerance. The other is about breaking rules to get results.
And yet they share this common DNA.
The output is the only thing that matters.
The declaration is irrelevant. The finished thing is the only truth.
The output doctrine. Which brings us to our third story, and this one. This one takes that idea of output and makes it incredibly personal. It almost feels like it quantifies the human soul.
Okay, let's hear it.
I was reading this interview with a young patent attorney in Ha-Joon, which is basically the Silicon Valley of Taiwan.
Right, the tech hub.
Yeah, and he was talking about this legendary researcher named Chen. And Chen is known throughout the tech parks not for his personality, not for his charm, but for his quantifiable output. And reading about him, I noticed this fascinating shift. It feels like in this world of emerging economic power, character is no longer seen as some subjective moral claim, but as a disciplined, measurable commitment to state capacity.
State capacity.
Yeah.
That's a term we usually apply to governments. You're applying it to a single person.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
Chen apparently holds over 50 patents personally in semiconductor cooling technologies.
That's a huge number.
It's staggering. And I heard that his colleagues, they don't describe him as kind or charismatic. Those words almost, they don't apply. They describe him as precise and unfailing.
Like a high-performance machine.
Exactly. And you have to imagine a culture where your ethical standing is measured by your direct contribution to the nation's technological sovereignty. It sounds so cold, doesn't it? So mechanical to view a human being as a generator of professional excellence.
It does feel a bit heavy.
I'll admit, reflecting on Chen's life, it felt heavy. This idea that a person is defined entirely by their utility to the collective, it leans toward a very rigid view of human value. But there is something undeniably moving about a person who views their life's work as a single brick in the wall of their nation's future.
It's a different kind of soulfulness, you know? It's a soulfulness found not in expressing the self, but in the absolute discipline of the deed.
The absolute discipline of the deed. That description of Chen, it just perfectly captures the essence of modern meritocracy as it exists in East Asia. It's very easy for us in the West to critique this as robotic or soulless, but we have to understand that there is a deep, deep historical root here.
We're talking about the imperial exams, right? The key Jew.
We are. I mean, this is a system that in various forms ran for over 1,000 years. The primary path to power and prestige in China and its cultural neighbors wasn't through your bloodline, or at least not only through bloodline, but through brutal standardized testing.
Right.
The imperial examination system embedded this idea deep in the culture, that social status should correlate with demonstrated competency. You had to memorize the Confucian classics, write poetry, understand complex governance. You had to prove you were worthy. So today, instead of memorizing Confucius, Chen is memorizing thermodynamics and patent law.
It's the same software running on different hardware. It's the same cultural logic. This is what the political scientist Daniel Bell calls virtue politics. The core idea is that the rulers, or the elites, must be technically and morally competent.
Which is different from our model.
Very. In the West, we often view elites with deep suspicion. We want to limit their power, check them, balance them. In the Confucian model, the goal is to select the best possible elites and then trust them to rule effectively.
And in the modern context of economic catch-up, best means most productive.
Yes. Our sources on the production-centered paradigm talk a lot about leapfrogging and technological fusion in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. For a nation to leapfrog, to literally jump over its competitors, it needs an army of people like Chen. The developmental state mobilizes capital into strategic sectors, like semiconductors were for Taiwan, and the individual's moral worth becomes directly tied to their contribution to that national project. Chen isn't just an inventor working for a company. He is a soldier in an economic war. His patents are his service to the nation.
And this spills over into how companies behave too. It's not just about individuals. One of the most interesting things I found in the research was about corporate governance in these Confucian environments. It seems that this Chen mentality, this output doctrine, it actually affects how companies handle their money.
It does. The hard financial data completely validates the cultural theory. Multiple studies show that companies operating in strong Confucian environments tend to hold less cash on their balance sheets.
Wait, see, I would have thought the opposite. I would have thought they'd hoard cash. They're usually described as conservative, risk-averse. Wouldn't they want a huge safety net?
You would think so, and that's a logical assumption. But we have to look at it through the lens of what's called agency theory, which is basically the study of the conflict of interest between managers and shareholders.
Okay.
In low trust environments, like maybe the US market, shareholders see a big pile of cash on the balance sheet as a risk. They worry the CEO is going to waste it on a vanity project, a corporate jet, a terrible acquisition.
Yeah. The agency problem.
Exactly. But the research suggests that in these Confucian cultures, there is a higher baseline of trust, the virtue of Xian.
Trustworthiness.
Right. Because there's a stronger ethical bond and immense social pressure against self-dealing and embezzlement, shareholders are more willing to trust that managers don't need a giant pile of cash just sitting there. They trust the money will be used wisely, or that it will be available through deep social and business networks when it's needed. The manager's character allows the company to be more capital efficient.
So the culture itself actually lowers the cost of doing business. That's incredible.
It is. And there's also a strong negative correlation with what's called earnings management.
Which is the polite corporate way of saying cooking the books.
Right. Managing your quarterly earnings to look smooth and consistent for Wall Street, even if the underlying business is volatile. Confucian ethics, specifically that virtue of trustworthiness, acts as a moral stricture against this kind of deception.
Okay.
The research indicates that managers in these environments are less likely to hide bad news, which, counterintuitively, actually leads to fewer massive stock price crashes. If the news is bad, they declare it, because to hide it would violate the rectification of names. It would be a lie about reality, and that's a deep dishonor.
That is fascinating. We in the West often stereotype these cultures as being opaque, implying they're hiding things. But in this specific financial sense, the internal moral pressure actually creates more transparency.
No way, yes.
Chen's patents are real. The numbers on the balance sheet are real. Because to fake them would be a dishonor not just to yourself, but to your family, your company, and the collective national project.
And that brings us right to the central tension of this whole deep dive. We have these three figures: Watanabe, the silent artisan; Lynn, the pragmatic protector; and Chen, the quantifiable innovator. In their own contexts, they are heroes. They are the absolute backbone of the East Asian miracle.
Right.
But what happens when this model of character, this model of integrity, collides with the West?
This is where we hit the bamboo ceiling.
Exactly. This is the term used to describe the very real, statistically proven barrier that keeps Asians and Asian Americans out of senior leadership positions in Western companies. And our sources suggest it's not just about simple prejudice, though of course that exists.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental clash of what social psychologists call implicit leadership theories.
Implicit leadership theory. Unpack that for us.
Okay, so basically we all carry around this subconscious template in our heads of what a leader looks like, sounds like, and acts like.
It's programmed into us.
It's programmed into us by movies, by politics, by school, by everything. In the United States, that template includes things like assertiveness, verbal charisma, being outspoken, a certain kind of vocal confidence. The squeaky wheel gets the oil.
It's the bistro philosopher. He fits that template perfectly. He's articulate. He commands attention.
He is the prototype.
Yeah.
We are trained from a young age to look for the person who is declaring their values, dominating the room, controlling the narrative. But in many East Asian cultures, the template is almost the inverse. It's humility, it's listening more than speaking, it's maintaining harmony, it's self-restraint. The nail that sticks out gets hammered down.
So if you take Mr. Watanabe or researcher Chen and you put them in a Silicon Valley startup, their silence, which is a sign of mastery and respect in their own culture, would be read as what?
It's read as a lack of ambition, a lack of executive presence. They are perceived as having low motivation to lead because they aren't fighting for the microphone in every meeting.
Even though their motivation might be off the charts.
It might be incredibly high, but it's a motivation geared toward service and output rather than toward individual status and voice. It's a different operating system.
It's just a tragic misalignment, isn't it? We have these organizations that are desperate for competence, for execution, for delivery, yet they filter out the very people whose entire ethical framework is built around delivery.
Simply because they don't perform the Western ritual of leadership correctly.
Yeah.
It's a classic double bind. Our source on the bamboo ceiling even mentions that when East Asian employees do try to act more assertive to fit the Western mold, they are often penalized for it because it violates the stereotype people have of them. They're seen as too aggressive or abrasive.
So they're trapped. They're trapped between a cultural expectation of silence and a corporate expectation of noise. And this brings us all the way back to the synthesis of these two models. On one hand, you have the Western regulatory or exchange-based model. It's focused on rules, individual rights, procedural justice, and declaring your values. That's the world of the bistro philosopher. And to be fair, that model is absolutely vital for protecting individual liberty, for ensuring fair play, for allowing diversity of thought. We are not saying it's bad.
No, not at all. It's essential. But then on the other hand, we have the Eastern developmental or production-based model. It's focused on results, on collective resilience, on substantive outcomes, and on demonstrating values through physical things, through infrastructure. That's the world of the factory technician. And that model is vital for building state capacity and surviving existential crises.
The danger, it seems to me, is when we confuse the two. Or worse, when, like my acquaintance in the bistro, we think the declaration is enough. We live in a society that is very, very good at talking about empathy, about sustainability, about integrity. We have amazing brand stories.
Best brand stories.
But are we building the levee? Are we polishing the lens to that 0.001 millimeter tolerance?
And that is the cognitive dissonance from your opening story. We mistake our intentions for our identity. The East Asian miracle wasn't built on good intentions. It wasn't built on beautifully crafted mission statements. It was built on the slow, painful, boring, difficult accumulation of acts.
It really forces you to look in the mirror. We started this deep dive with a story about a guy who claimed to value dignity but couldn't show a shred of it when a tired delivery driver bumped his chair.
Yeah.
We journeyed from there through the silent precision of a Japanese factory, the muddy desperation of a Chinese flood zone, and then the high-pressure labs of a Taiwanese tech park.
And the common thread, the single thing that runs through Watanabe, Lynn, and Chen is that character is physics.
Character is physics. I love that.
It occupies space, it bears weight, it resists force. It's a real thing in the world.
Exactly. Character is not what you say at a leadership retreat. It is the tolerance of your work. It is the safety of your infrastructure. It is the validity of your patents.
And in a world that feels increasingly fragile, ecologically, economically, politically, that distinction between talk and thing matters more than it ever has.
It really does. And I just want to leave you with this one final thought. We spend so much of our time and energy curating our profiles, polishing our mission statements, and broadcasting our why. But if the power went out, if the floodwaters rose, or if the machinery stopped, would your philosophy matter? Perhaps we are entering an era where the world is just too fragile for declarations. In the end, the only thing that truly speaks is the quality of what we leave behind. The lens is polished or it isn't. The levee holds or it breaks. The rest is just noise.
The rest is just noise.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.